Today I'm going to be speaking to you regarding an investigation conducted by the Toronto Strategic Partnership. The Toronto Strategic Partnership is a collaboration of the Toronto Police Service, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Competition Bureau of Canada, the Ontario Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, the Ontario Ministry of Finance, the United States Federal Trade Commission, and the United States Postal Inspection Service. I'll be describing an emerging scheme that has resulted in significant losses to Toronto victims. I'm going to be providing some detail, but I'm not going to be getting into details of the investigation or any details of the evidence. We are reminding the public to be very vigilant regarding phone-based fraud schemes. Recently, members of the public have been contacted via phone by persons posing as retailers who are informing them of a fraud in progress involving their credit card account. After the initial conversation, the victim may be advised to dial 911 in order to alert police of the credit card fraud that is supposedly in progress. The victim may also be advised to contact their financial institution in order to protect their financial interests. The victim may hang up and do so while being unaware that the original caller has not hung up on the other end. The victim believes that they have contacted police via 911 and or their financial institution, but in fact, they've been redirected to an imposter who's posing as a 911 call taker or a bank employee. The supposed call taker will speak to the victim and connect them to yet another imposter posing as a police investigator or as a bank investigator, either by connecting them directly or asking them to hang up and call the number on the back of their bank card. The victim will comply, again being unaware that in fact the caller on the other end has not hung up the phone. The victim will be informed of an internal investigation at the bank, and they'll be urged to attend their bank branch and to transfer funds, usually via wire transfer, to a specific account that is supposedly intended to safeguard their funds until the investigation is complete. It's important to remember that these details can vary from person to person depending on the circumstances. So what I'm describing to you is that's the generic scheme, but there are variations. The scheme appears to be directed at persons using their home-based phones. There's no particular phone provider involved. To date, 5 Toronto victims have suffered losses of over 5.1 million Canadian. Investigators believe there may be other victims. There is evidence to indicate that the scheme is being conducted nationwide and hundreds of thousands of attempts have been made. Furthermore, there's evidence to indicate that in certain cases, the callers may have already possessed some of the victim's financial information. The public are reminded of the following. 911 is for emergencies where persons or property are at risk. A 911 call taker will not forward your call to an investigator. If you're in doubt about the security of your finances, your personal funds, attend your bank branch in person and make inquiries there, not over the phone. Financial institutions will never advise you to transfer your funds to an external account for security reasons. When contacted via phone by persons claiming to be police officers and or bank employees or other officials, take reasonable steps to ensure that their claim is truthful. Do not assume that phone numbers appearing on call display screens are accurate. There is readily available technology called call spoofing technology, which is frequently utilized by criminals to provide inaccurate call display information. We encourage persons who believe they may have fallen victim to this scheme to contact their police service and report the event as soon as possible. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.
So the victim hangs up the phone and dials again?
The victim hangs up the phone and dials, and they insist they've heard dial tones and believe they have called 911. I don't want to speculate about on the technical aspect of this, but I will say that in certain circumstances, it is possible that if the call taker or the call maker has not hung up the phone, one could be led to believe they're making an outgoing call when in fact they're still on the same line.
Are there specific demographics that are being targeted, like the elderly?
Not that I'm aware of, no. It appears to be a true mass marketing scheme in the sense that there are certainly hundreds of thousands of attempts that have been made. That said, as I stated, there are some victims that believe that their financial information was already in the possession of these people. It's difficult for us to say whether in fact that was the case, or perhaps they have also been the victim of some very clever social engineering. So I'm throwing it out there that they at least have that belief that the person who's speaking to them already has their financial information.
Detective, I 5.1 million is a large sum of money. Can you just go over where that money came from? Is it credit card money? Is it straight out of their account? How do they?
I can't get into those details. It is a significant amount of money, and I've certainly seen a lot of that, but that is an excessive amount, yes.
How does it break down between the 5 victims?
I'm not going there.
Can you say what the most amount is?
No, I can't get into the details. There's 5.1 million with 5 victims that we're aware of. That's as far as I can go.
Is this something that all happened like in the one event, like phone call to phone call to phone call, or were they receiving further calls in the days that followed?
There are follow-up phone calls, and one thing that I would add, there is an effort to convince the victim of the need for secrecy. They are persuaded that there is an ongoing bank investigation involving perhaps a complicit employee, and this is again a fabrication, but that's what they're persuaded. So they're persuaded there's a need for secrecy, and they will keep the victims, the calls ongoing for several days. And I believe the reason for doing so is to ensure that no efforts are made to recover the money whilst it's being withdrawn from wherever it's been sent to. Typically, when wire transfers are made, it's difficult to move that money along quickly. So it has to be withdrawn in increments. So the longer they can keep the victim holding that belief that there is this ongoing investigation, the greater the culprit's chance is to obtain all of the money that has been sent abroad.
So the money that is transferred, though, on day one? Generally?
Not necessarily, no. I wouldn't say that. It could take several days.
But no, do they initiate a transfer on day one?
Certainly attempts are made. I'm not going to get specific about when they were made.
I know you said you didn't have much technical information, but would leaving your phone hung up for a longer period of time initiate the full disconnect service with the caller that's calling in?
Well, I want to be careful at the point. The one common component to this is that all the victims were using home-based phones. That's the first thing. So we're not talking about a mobile phone. We're talking about home-based. My understanding is that the phone companies have varying features when it comes to that hanging up and disconnecting. I've heard numbers ranging from 13 seconds to 25 seconds. I don't want to commit to any of those because I'm not sure if there's some others that it would take longer. Certainly, if you were in doubt about who was calling you, it might be a good idea to perhaps hang up, and if you have another phone line available, to make your own call to a number that you've already researched. That would be one way to cover that off. Certainly, I think if you hung up for a minute, you would probably be safe. But again, I don't know all the features that all the telcos use. It's possible that one could last longer than that.
Are there victims around the country and in different other? You say you're part of this coordinated effort with the FBI, with the United States government, RCP, whatever. Are there other victims around North America? Do we know where these are originating from?
Well, the strategic partnership, which is part of an investigating unit that I'm part of, they're partners with us throughout. But that said, this investigation that I'm detailing today deals specifically with Toronto victims. I believe, based on the investigation to date, that victims across Canada are being targeted.
Do you know possibly where these? Is this sort of another European or African, Nigerian kind of?
There is a foreign component to this investigation, but I'm not in a position to say where the calls are originating from.
Can you just talk about, you said there's 5 people that have built out this money, but how many calls have been put out? How many people have reached out to you about the fact that they've been contacted by this?
Well, I said at the beginning it was an emerging scheme because this is actually fairly new to us. So I'm aware of the 5 Toronto occurrences. We're obviously hopeful that with this information that if others have been victimized, they'll come forward. I'm confident in saying that there are hundreds of thousands of attempts that have been made nationwide, but in terms of reporting of those incidents, we haven't been informed of anything beyond what I'm talking about.
Is it your belief at this point that there are more victims?
I believe it's quite likely, yes.
How do you get to hundreds of thousands of attempts?
Well, that's getting into the investigation. I can't go there.
You say you're onto these guys? Like, are you getting close to them? Like,
I'm not going to get into the investigation.
You alluded a little bit to this earlier, but in terms of just, we get calls into the newsroom on a weekly basis for various phone scams. How difficult is it to keep up with these evolving fraudsters, and kind of what's your strategy in terms of that?
That covers a lot of ground. Um, these schemes, there's many variations, but that said, they all have something in common. One's not particularly harder than the other, so we keep up it as best as we can, but it's, it's constantly changing.
So you said there's a foreign component to this, but is there also a domestic component? Are people here in Canada helping them out?
There is a foreign component, and there may be a domestic component as well, and that's about as much as I can say. Sorry, someone over there? This has been going on for 4 months that we're aware of.
Do all these victims have the same service provider?
There are different service providers.
Can you give us one nugget? One real good nugget? You're on these guys or whatever.
That's about as far as I can go.
So your main goal today is to prevent further victims and to combat victims?
Well, we definitely want to make the public aware that this is occurring, and hopefully we can prevent further victimization. And we're obviously hoping that victims who people who've already been victimized by this and haven't reported it will come forward. I'm hopeful that if somebody is maybe in progress and considering following up on a similar event, that they contact us first.
How has this affected the lives of these victims?
Well, 5.1 is over 5 people is a significant amount of money, so I presume it's affected them adversely.
Is there any common theme between all of the victims in terms of age or gender or anything like that?
No.
All of them
There's again, I'm dealing with 5 people, and I don't want to paint this all with a broad brush. I have no idea about the other victims that have been targeted and haven't reported yet, so I shouldn't really be going there.
There's a level of sophistication, like you mentioned phone spooks, and that's clearly easier than that. But everything else, from your experience, do you think these guys are technologically really advanced, like hackers or something? Or
I certainly think at this point that based on the number of calls that we believe are being made, that they've employed technology that allows for robocalling and so on. How sophisticated you have to be to do that, I don't know. I think that you just subscribe to it. There's obviously they're pretty good pitchmen in terms of convincing the victims. The victims, I would add, they're not. They're all on the ball. They're not people that you would consider to be otherwise to be vulnerable to this sort of thing. So I'm assuming the pitch is pretty good.
Saying robocalls, are they robocalls that call, or is it a live person that calls?
Well, they speak to a live person, but as you may or may not know, the technology employed for legitimate mass marketing purposes involves. There is a possibility to call numbers, and then if nobody picks up, it just goes to the next caller until someone does pick up, and then you'll be connected to a live person. So I presume, based on the number of calls that we believe have been made, that that technology is likely being employed.
It's not a digitized voice or anything like that, like you get with some of the CRA scams.
I'm sorry?
It's not like a digitized voice. That
No,
you get with
they're
some of the-
speaking to a live person, a real person.
Detective, 5.1 million for 5 people is a pretty large number for a small group of people. In your career working in fraud, where does that kind of rank? Because it seems like
It's right up there. We've seen more, but that's definitely right up there. And for a mass marketing type fraud, yeah, it's high, very high.
At what point did these victims realize that they've been duped?
There was a significant lag in the reporting of the events after they occurred. So what that tells me is that it was obviously it was a very convincing pitch because they sent the money, and there may be embarrassment involved, or they just may be in denial. But there was a lag between the reporting of the event and when the events actually occurred.
What kind of lag? How long?
I don't want to go there.
But you said this has been going on for 4 months. Like, did the reports come in 4 months before, or do you think it started?
Based on our investigation, I can say that I believe this has been going on for at least 4 months. I really don't want to go any further than that.
Is there a level of common sense involved here? I mean, if you're getting a call asking you to transfer money, I mean, most people would just hang up the phone.
It's easy to say that in hindsight. What I would say again is that the victims come across, these are educated, credible people. One thing you'll find in common with victims of this type of offense is that it's often just about what's going on in their life at that particular time that made this whole thing make sense to them. And maybe in another time they wouldn't have fallen victim to it, but in this case they did.
5 million over 5 people, are they targeting people that they already know might have greater financial means, or are they targeting everyone across the economic scale?
We've considered everything. It may well be that this is a broad scheme directed at a large number of people, but they may also have a short list of persons they're targeting. I don't know the answer to that question, though.
But to come up with 5 million with just 5 people is pretty good odds.
It could be a lucky shot on their part, or it could be that they, you know, that the suggestion is out there that some of them at least had banking information associated to their victims. But that doesn't mean they actually had it. It could mean that the victims were duped into providing it. It's really hard for us to make that claim. So it is possible that there's several components. There could be a mass marketing side to it, but they could also be focusing on certain individuals, and we just don't have enough information right now to make that determination.
Have you spoken to, I know you said this is across Canada, have you spoken to other jurisdictions that are, I know the RCMP is involved, just to find out if it's happening in other regions across Canada?
We've spoken with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. I believe it's relatively new to them as well. This type of scheme has occurred in the United Kingdom. There's a history of it there, less so now.
How long ago?
Good question.
Is there any recourse for any of these victims?
There may be. The investigation is occurring here. There's another country involved, and they're making inquiries as well. So you never want to say never, but realistically, when that money is gone, it doesn't take very long to unload it. So, you know, recovery is usually not realistic in these types of investigations.
One of my colleagues asked about service providers, phone companies. What about banking institutions? Is it the same bank across the board?
We have no information to indicate that any particular bank is targeted.
And the only means of communication was over the phone, or text messages, emails, anything like that?
Strictly over the phone.
Always a landline.
I beg your pardon?
Always a landline.
It's a landline that the victims are being called on, yes.
Have you had any communication with the actual 5 big banks in Canada?
Any investigation involving this type of offense, we're always talking with the banks, yes.
What have they said about it?
I can't get into the details of the investigation.
Why landlines only? Why not cell phones?
Well, I suppose that there is something specific about the technology employed in landlines that may make this possible. That's something you'd have to take up with the telcos, though.
I asked you this before, and like you said, given the amount of money, it must have had a pretty adverse effect on them. But can you just give us a little bit more feeling for like the human element of this? Like, is it like when you find out you've been duped for $1 million, 500,000, whatever it is for each of these victims? Like, how does that affect somebody on a personal level? What are these people like when they come to you and you're investigators?
Surprisingly, they were very calm. They were quite rational, and they all realized that they had been duped, and it was actually quite matter of fact. But that said, I mean, I have no doubt. I know that I would certainly be affected by that. That's not really possible given the amount, but I would be adversely affected by it.
But I mean, have any of these people like to sell their homes, or I mean, are these people financially well off that $1 million hit? They can move on and continue with life.
I'm not going to comment on the financial status of any of the victims.
Detective, anybody you victims want to talk to, you know, directly or anything?
Nobody has indicated that they wish to do so at this point.
Do you have any idea how many people are involved in this scheme?
No,
Even broadly? Like,
I really don't know.
or-
I don't know at this point.
Do
No.
you have any kind of recordings of the actual scam that you could provide?
We wouldn't be providing that.
Were any of these left on, like, answering machines or message voicemail? Or is it just if someone doesn't, if a live person doesn't pick up, they move on to the next person?
I can't get into the details of the investigation.
Is there anything common in the script that the person uses?
Well, that's one thing I can say is that all of the details of the conversations are all very similar. There's definitely a pitch. And you don't want to get too specific in the description of it because that pitch can always be varied, but there are common elements. And certainly one common element is the asking the victims to call 911. Currently, it starts off with a call from a jeweler telling the victim that there's a credit card fraud in progress using their credit card. But if I say that, tomorrow they could call up and they could say that it's a gas station, or they could say that it's another retailer. So I don't want to, focus too much on those specifics. But there's a common methodology that leads us to believe this is all the same people using the same pitch.